I said the 4 words that got me exiled from my family. I can't babysit this weekend. My daughter-in-law told me I was choosing myself over my son. My son responded by changing the locks on the house I paid for. 1 week later, I stood in front of that house with a stranger by my side. If you're here, stay with me to the end. I want to know what city you're watching my story from, to see just how far the story of my exile has reached. The road to my son Edward's house was as familiar to me as the lines on my own hands. I had walked it 1,000 times. That house, I was the one who paid the down payment for it, with $85,000 from a lifetime of savings. And now, there I was, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorbell. No one answered. I pulled my old key from my pocket. It slid into the lock but wouldn't turn. They had really done it. I remembered the phone call from the day before. Lauren, my daughter-in-law, her voice sharp and fast. "Mary, are you free this weekend?" "We need you to watch Isabel and Nico." It was a command, not a request. I gripped the edge of the table, the sharp pain in my knee flaring up. I had already postponed my specialist appointment twice for Lauren's last-minute favors. The doctor had been clear. "Mary, if you don't come in now, you risk permanent damage." "Honey," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "This weekend is my doctor's appointment." He said I can't put it off again. A long, cold silence followed. When Lauren finally spoke, her voice was low and laced with venom. "Oh, I see. So your health is more important than your son's family." The words hit me like a slap. "How can you say that?" I stammered. "The pain is so bad I can barely stand." She sighed, a sound full of contempt. "Fine, Mary. The moment we actually need you, you disappear." She hung up. 2 hours later, the text from my son shattered what was left of my heart. "Mom, don't come to our house anymore. It's time we set some boundaries. We've changed the locks." I dialed his number. Over and over, it went straight to a recording. The number was no longer in service. I walked to their house and knocked. "Lauren! Edward!" "It's your mother. Open the door." The upstairs curtain twitched. Then the front door opened. Lauren stood there, arms crossed, a cruel laugh escaping her lips. "Do you really think you can just show up here whenever you want? This isn't your house anymore." Edward appeared behind her, his face a mask of weary indifference. His silence was his answer. "You know everything I've done for this family?" I pleaded. Edward finally spoke, his voice cold and empty. "Mom, do you really think that helping out with a few bucks gives you the right to run our lives?" "We're tired of it. A few bucks." The phrase echoed in my skull. $85,000. The new roof. Isabel's daycare. The money I sent every single month. All of it. Just a few bucks. Lauren slammed the door. The sound of the deadbolt was a final sentence. A week passed. I couldn't live in that suffocating silence. I had to go back. This time I didn't go alone. The man with me, Valentine Morris, was quiet and observant. A neighbor said he could help. When I told him my story, he didn't offer sympathy. He just said, "Tell me what papers you need. I'll get them." At the house, I rang the bell. Nothing. Mr. Morris opened his worn leather briefcase and handed me a sealed manila envelope. "If they won't open up, we'll just leave this." I placed it on the top step, next to one of Isabel's tiny abandoned sandals. Through the frosted glass of the living room window, I saw Lauren's silhouette, watching me. As we walked away, Mr. Morris asked, "Are you sure you want to see this through to the end, ma'am?" "I'm not sure," I answered. "But I know I'm done being their doormat." He dropped me off, but before going home, I walked to the boarded-up storefront of the shoe store where I had worked for 20 years. It was there, selling shoes on aching feet, that I had saved every penny for my son's future, a future that now had a new lock on the door. Back in my apartment, I opened a second envelope Mr. Morris had given me. Inside were copies, the down payment contract, the original bank transfer for $85,000, and his business card. I sat with my old faded notebook, its pages filled with the receipts and records of my sacrifice. I remembered when Edward was 12, crying because the other kids made fun of his torn sneakers. I had no money, but I couldn't bear his shame. I went to my boss and begged for a payroll advance, enduring his sneer. "Again, Mary? Can't even save up for a pair of shoes?" I swallowed my pride, bought the sneakers, and my son's smile lit up my world. "You're the best mom in the world," he'd said. Where did that boy go? When he went to college, I took a second job cleaning offices at night. I would come home after midnight, my body aching, but I'd still pack him care packages. I just wanted him to have the peace to study. During his last semester, he called me in a panic. "Mom, I need a lot of money for my final project. If I don't turn it in, I won't graduate." He needed $15,000. I didn't have it, but I couldn't let him fail. I went to a high-interest lender, a man whose name you didn't ask, and signed papers that shackled me to a soul-crushing debt for years. Every week, I counted every penny, saving on food, on electricity, chipping away at that loan, all so my son could have his dream. I paid $40,000 for their wedding, and my daughter-in-law's only thank you was to complain that the dress I bought her wasn't stylish enough. Edward graduated, and I wept as I saw him on stage in his cap and gown, his smile so bright. He never knew that to pay his tuition, his mother was already half broken from working 2 jobs and paying off high-interest loans. After graduation, he started dating Lauren. From the first moment I met her, I knew something was wrong. She shook my hand limply, her eyes scanning my wrinkles as if she were appraising used furniture. I wore my nicest blouse and smiled, but she just nodded and muttered something to Edward. I only caught one word, hick. Because I saw how enchanted he was, I held my tongue. I brought out a homemade pie, trying to break the ice. Lauren glanced at it. "Homemade? How?" "Quaint," I managed a weak laugh. "It's Edward's favorite. I've been making it for him since he was a boy." She said nothing, just turned her face away. For their wedding, I used everything I had saved over 10 years, more than $40,000, so Edward could have a beautiful day. I wanted it to be special, but it wasn't enough for Lauren. One day, I overheard Edward telling a friend, "Lauren says my mom should have paid for the dress too. That she barely helped at all." The words turned my blood to ice. Barely helped. I had paid for the venue, the catering, the band. Still, I swallowed my pride, went to the lender, and took out another $4,000 loan for her dress. When she came out of the dressing room, all I hoped for was a simple, "Thank you." Instead, she looked at my reflection in the mirror and said, "It's fine, but next time, pick something a little more modern. This is a bit plain." When Edward lost his job, I told them to move into my 1-bedroom apartment. I gave them my room and slept on a makeshift bed on the couch, my back aching for 4 straight months. In all that time, Lauren cooked twice. The rest was on me. I cooked, I cleaned, I did the laundry, I took Isabel to daycare. Some days I was up at 5 a.m. to make breakfast for the baby before heading to my job at the shoe store. Lauren would just say, "It's so great you can help out." "We're just so busy." I would just nod, believing I was supporting my son. When they wanted their own place, I didn't hesitate. I sold the small plot of land my parents had left me and gave them the $85,000 for the down payment on the house they live in now. I put the property in Edward's name, thinking that with a home of their own, they would finally be stable. The day they signed the papers, I stood outside the lawyer's office, watching them laugh together. No one turned around to ask, "Mom, are you okay?" That night, I opened my ledger from 2021. The first entry, $700 to fix the gas stove at Edward's house. I had noted every single expense in detail. The new roof after the storm, Isabel's daycare, Nico's vaccines. I arrived at the last page and read the final line. Birthday gift for Isabel, $300. When was the last time they had asked me, "Mom, do you need anything?" I couldn't remember. The next morning, my phone vibrated. It was a text from Marge, Edward's neighbor. "Mary, I don't want to meddle." But Lauren told the neighborhood watch group that her mother-in-law is getting old, can't control her emotions, and likes to stick her nose where it doesn't belong. Lauren hadn't just shut the door on me. She was poisoning my name, painting me as a crazy, intrusive old woman. I decided to walk to the grocery store just to get out of the house. As soon as I entered, I saw Isabel with a woman I didn't recognize, the new nanny, I presumed. My granddaughter was wearing the little coat I'd bought for her birthday. I started toward her, but the woman stepped in front of me, her voice cold. "My employer's orders. No strangers are allowed to approach the child." "Strangers?" I looked at Isabel. Our eyes met for a second before she quickly looked away, as if she didn't know me. I stood frozen in the aisle, a ghost in my own life. That night I sat at my kitchen table and opened my old ledger. I began to write down every expense I could remember. The down payment on the house, $85,000. The roof repair, $3,000. Isabel's daycare, $8,000 a year. Nico's insurance and medical bills, over $4,000. In just 6 years, it totaled nearly $140,000. I wrote each number with a trembling hand, not because of the money, but because I finally understood that all of it, my entire life's sacrifice, fit into a single, dismissive phrase from my son. A few bucks. Valentine's question echoed in my mind. Are you sure you want to see this through to the end? I finally understood what he meant. This wasn't about money. It was about whether my life, my sacrifices, had any value at all. I went to my closet and took out the old coat I wore when I cared for the children. Nico had slept in my arms in that coat. I had pushed Isabel on the swings at the park in that coat. I folded it neatly and put it in the back of the closet, as if I were putting away a part of my life. I didn't cry, but my eyes burned. I knew in that moment that I could not continue to live as a ghost. Valentine had shown me a light, not of hope, but of an option. For the first time in years, I felt the urge to stand up. Not for anyone else. For me, a week later, I pushed open the door to Valentine Morris's small office. The sign outside was faded, Morris & Associates, Legal Services. Inside it smelled of old paper and cold coffee. Mrs. Daniels, he said, his voice calm and steady. I assume you've made a decision, I nodded. That envelope you gave me last week, I asked, my voice low but firm. Did it have everything I need? It did, he said. The copy of the down payment contract, proof of the wire transfers from your accounts, and the handwritten letter you gave me. I had written that letter on a sleepless night, listing every sacrifice, not to demand anything back, but simply to force them to remember, to prove I was not invisible. They haven't responded, Valentine said, but I imagine they've read it. That letter was the first sign that you will no longer be silent. Do you want to sue them to recover your assets? No, I said, surprising myself with my own firmness. I just want them to stop living as if I never existed. He nodded and began to write. I asked him to help me draft 3 documents. First, the cancellation of the power of attorney I had given Edward years ago. Second, a stop order on all automatic transfers from my bank account to theirs. The monthly money for bills, for repairs, for the children, it would end. Finally, I wanted to write a new will. My voice trembled slightly. Everything I have, this apartment, my savings, I want most of it to go to the Lighthouse Foundation, a charity that supports abandoned women. A small portion, I want to be put into a trust for Isabel and Nico, but they can only access it if they come to find me themselves, with an open heart. Valentine wrote without question. When I left his office, a weight had been lifted. I walked past the market, past the church, past the ghosts of my old life. I didn't know if Lauren or Edward had read my letter, but just knowing they held it in their hands, that they were forced to see the sum of my life written in my own hand, it felt like I had taken back a piece of myself. For the first time in a very long time, I felt I had the right to decide my own future. That night, I slept better than I had in years because I knew I was finally walking my own path, and no one else's. 3 days after I left the envelope on their doorstep, my phone vibrated on the kitchen table. I saw the screen. It was Edward. I felt a small chill, not of excitement, but of readiness. I was prepared for this call, I answered, my voice quiet. Hello. Edward's voice was softer than I remembered, a transparent attempt to mend a bridge he had already burned. Mom, how are you? It's been a while since we talked. You've been so cold. I was silent for a moment, my hand wrapped around a cup of now cold coffee. I'm fine, I said, allowing no emotion to leak into my voice. He hesitated. Listen, the bank notified us that an insurance payment was canceled this week. That must be a mistake with the system, right? I cut him off, my voice serene but firm. It wasn't the system, Edward. I did it on purpose. A long silence stretched across the line. I could hear his breathing, and then his voice tighter now, straining for control. You can't do this over one little thing, Mom. Family is family, not some legal contract. I pressed my lips together, staring out the window at the morning sun. When my family treats me like a stranger, I said calmly, I have the right to act like one too. Without waiting for a response, I ended the call. On my table was an application form to volunteer at the Lighthouse, a local women's shelter. I had sent it in right after meeting with Valentine Morris. I refused to sit in my quiet apartment and let the silence of my son and his wife continue to suffocate me. The following Monday, I walked into the shelter for the first time. It was an old building with peeling white paint, but inside it was teeming with life. They asked me to teach reading and writing to a group of women who had never been to school. They sat around a wooden table, their hands struggling to hold the pencils, but their eyes shone every time they managed to write their own names. One woman my age held my hand after class. "Thank you, Mary," she said, her eyes wet. "Today I wrote my daughter's name for the first time." I smiled but felt a familiar ache. I had taught Isabel how to write too, but now she wouldn't even look at me. I began to realize I didn't need to hear a child's laughter every night to feel my own worth. I didn't want to be the person they only called when they needed a free service. Days later, my phone buzzed. It was a letter, forwarded as a picture from Lauren. Her handwriting was firm, each word a carefully aimed dart. "You are destroying this family. This isn't what a mother is supposed to do. We won't beg you, but don't complain when there's nothing left to save." I searched for a hint of remorse and apology, but there was only cold, hard blame, as if every sacrifice I had ever made was worthless. That afternoon, I heard shouting from the street. "Mom, open the gate." It was Edward's voice, angry and desperate. I looked through the curtain and saw him standing there, his hair a mess, banging on the metal gate. "I'm your son!" "How can you do this to me just because Lauren said something you didn't like?" I looked at him, the boy I had carried, the boy whose future I had bought with high-interest loans, and for the first time I felt no pity. Only exhaustion. I didn't open the gate. I didn't answer. I just closed the curtain, listened to a few more shouts, and then the sound of his car speeding away. The bond between us had been broken, and I no longer had the desire to piece it back together. That night, I walked to the bank. I had an appointment to transfer my main savings account, over $100,000 that I had saved my entire life. Its destination, the Lighthouse Foundation. The young bank teller looked at me surprised. "Are you sure, ma'am? This is a very large amount." I nodded, feeling a sense of peace. I spent my life giving to those who didn't deserve it. Now I want to choose wisely. I signed the papers. I kept a small portion for myself, just enough to live on, and opened a new trust account in the names of Isabel and Nico. I wanted my grandchildren to have something, but only if they chose to find me themselves, not because they were forced to. On my way home, I bought a new sturdy hardcover journal. Back at my table, I opened it to the first page and wrote, "Every time I say no, I am saving what's left of myself." Before bed, I checked my mailbox one last time. Inside was a flyer from the Lighthouse. It said, "Women were not born to serve in gratitude." I took it and pinned it to the corkboard beside my bed. The old family photo that used to hang there, I had taken it down last month. I no longer needed it. A year has passed since I hung up the phone on my son for the last time. That first winter was truly quiet. No calls, no children's laughter. But the silence in my little house no longer felt heavy. I found a new rhythm, a part of myself that Edward and Lauren had buried. I still go to the Lighthouse every week. I teach women to read. I help them fill out aid applications. I listen to their stories. One young woman, Sophia, was thrown out by her stepfather after she had the courage to call the police on him for abuse. As I helped her write her name, I saw her eyes light up. I saw myself reflected in them, someone once ignored, now learning to stand on her own. One Friday afternoon, I was watering the daisies on my porch. The air was cold, but I liked the feeling. It kept me awake. I heard a soft, insistent knock on my door. I dried my hands on my apron and opened it. Edward was standing there. He was thinner than I remembered, with a beard he hadn't bothered to trim and eyes so hollow they looked as if he hadn't slept in days. In his arms, he was carrying Nico, wrapped in a thin blanket, sleeping deeply. Beside him stood Isabel, clutching a crumpled plastic bag, her eyes wide as if she were holding back a flood of tears. I looked at them, saying nothing. I just felt a dull ache in my knee. Edward spoke, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Lauren's gone. She left the kids. I lost my job. I'm behind more than $10,000 in rent and bills. I have nowhere to take them." I stood there, looking at his face. This wasn't the boy I'd bought shoes for or sent money to in college. This was an exhausted man cornered by his own life. I still said nothing. I just stepped back and opened the door wider. Isabel was the first to enter, her step soft. She turned to look at me and whispered, "I missed your house. Grandma." Her voice was so quiet, but it was enough to warm my soul. Edward placed a sleeping Nico on the living room sofa, then slid to the floor, his face in his hands. He wept with the choked, broken sobs of a man who has no pride or strength left, nothing like the man who had once told me to stop meddling, I said nothing. I just guided Isabel and Nico to the spare room. I had placed 2 small beds in there months ago, not because I knew they were coming, but because I wanted my home to always be ready for them. Isabel sat on the bed, clutching her plastic bag as if it were a treasure. "Can we stay here forever, Grandma?" she asked, her eyes never leaving mine. I stroked her messy hair. "You can stay with me for as long as you need." I went back to the living room. Edward was still on the floor, his head bowed. I poured him a glass of water and set it in front of him. I didn't want to console him or scold him. I just wanted the children to be safe. That night I cooked a large pot of chicken and dumplings, and the warm scent filled the house. Edward ate without looking up, without saying a word. When he finished, I walked him to the door. "You can come back tomorrow," I said quietly. "But tonight, you need to find another place to sleep. I'll take care of the children." He looked at me, his eyes red, and just nodded before walking out the gate. The next morning, after Edward had a quiet breakfast with the children, I spoke to him, my voice serene. "The children will stay here, but you need to find your own place to live." He looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Mom, I know I was wrong," he murmured. "But I have nowhere to go." I interrupted him, my voice firm but not harsh. "I have forgiven you, Edward. But I cannot go back to the way things were. This house is not a refuge for grown men who refuse to take responsibility for their lives." I slid a piece of paper across the table, the address, for a social support and job placement center that a friend from the lighthouse had told me about. "You can start over," I said. "But not by hiding in your mother's arms." Isabel ran to him, her voice trembling. "Where are you going, Daddy? You have to stay too." He knelt and hugged her, his own eyes filling with tears. I stepped out onto the porch to give them their moment. That same afternoon, Edward left with nothing but a tattered backpack and his old phone. Before he walked out the door, he turned to me. "I won't ask you for anything else," he said. "But if you ever need me, I'll come back, this time to help you." I just nodded. I didn't cry or feel victorious. I only felt a strange calm, as if I had finally set down a weight I had carried for too long. 3 months later, my little house was filled with the sounds of children again. Every morning I make cornbread for Isabel and warm milk with honey for Nico. The house, once cold and silent, is now overflowing with life and warmth. One day, Isabel ran out of her room holding a crayon drawing. It was of me standing between her and Nico. In the corner, in crooked but clear letters, she had written, "Grandma." We taped it to the refrigerator, right next to the letter from the lighthouse saying my donation had helped more than 20 women escape violent homes and start over. Seeing the two there together, I felt a peace settle in my chest, as if I had finally found my place. Edward sends letters sometimes. The first one arrived 2 weeks after he left. He'd found a job as a salesman at a hardware store. He didn't ask for money or pity. He just asked about the kids. Once he wrote only one line, "I understand now why you couldn't save me again. Thank you for continuing to save the children." I read the letter without tears. I sent back a photo of Isabel laughing on a swing set. On the back, I wrote, "Be someone they will be proud to talk about." A year has passed since I closed the door on my old life. I still volunteer at the lighthouse, where I teach women to read and help them find the strength I found in myself. My house has no luxuries, just old chairs, a chipped kitchen table, and pots of daisies on the porch. But it is filled with enough warmth to be a real home. I look back and understand that the greatest lesson was that love doesn't mean sacrificing yourself blindly. It means learning to love yourself first so that you can love others properly. The lighthouse, Isabel and Nico taught me that a home is where love is nurtured, not where it is used or ignored. And I taught myself that it is never too late to choose your own path. I'm so curious. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you choose silence to keep the peace? Or would you have the courage to fight to get your voice back? I want to know what you think, because every story is a candle that can light the way for someone else. God always blesses, and I firmly believe that courage leads us to better days.